What's going on YouTube? This is Unger to the Max here. Salute. And just wanted to give you an update on the upcoming UFC pay-per-view schedule. So the next UFC pay-per-view event is UFC 225 from Chicago, Illinois at the United Center on June 9th, I believe. The main event will be a rematch of UFC 213. Robert Whittaker against Yoel Romero at the time for the interim middleweight championship. But after UFC 217, when George St. Pierre vacated the belt, Robert Whittaker got promoted to middleweight champion, and so he'll be defending his belt against Yoel Romero, who beat Luke Rockhold at UFC 221 to become the interim champion. And then the co-main event is for the interim welterweight championship, because the champion Tyron Woodley had shoulder surgery and hasn't been able to defend his belt since UFC 214 when he beat Damian Maia. After UFC 225 is UFC 226, which unfortunately I won't be able to watch. But the main event is Cleveland's own heavyweight champion Stipe Miocic taking on the UFC light heavyweight champion Daniel Cormier, who seems to have some sort of connection to Cleveland, which I don't understand. And I've discussed this in a previous video. I believe it was called UFC Fight Night Analysis and a Call Out. But I'll bring it up again. During the UFC 203 post-fight show on Fox Sports 1, Cormier was interviewing Miocic, and he was saying, "Our monster," and this was back in 2016, "our monsters, our Cavaliers, our Indians." But last time I checked, Daniel Cormier is not from Cleveland. So I don't understand that. And Cormier did a show about Stipe called In the Clinch, filmed in Cleveland, and Cormier was wearing an Indians hat. So that makes sense. But if I would love to go to a UFC 226 press conference. And the co-main event of UFC 226 will be for the featherweight belt. After Max Holloway failed to make the 155 pound weight for UFC 223 against Khabib, he will now defend his 145-pound belt against Brian Ortega, who defeated Frankie Edgar at UFC 222. Frankie Edgar was supposed to face Max Holloway in the main event, but that fell out. And of course, Chris Cyborg would go on to defeat Yana Kunitskaya in the new main event. And Ortega was the first guy to stop Frankie Edgar. So that immediately set up this title match. And then UFC 226 will take place at T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. And then the main event for UFC 227 will be for the bantamweight belt between the new champion TJ Dillashaw and the former champion Cody Garbrandt. Now, this rivalry, of course, boiled over at UFC 217 as a result of Cody feeling like TJ Dillashaw betrayed Team Alpha Male and him, because Dillashaw was saying, "I'm with Team Alpha Male" and all that, and then he decides to go off and join and be with a different fight team, which I understand why Cody Garbrandt would be upset about that, but at the same time, I don't see it as that big of a deal. But it's a great rivalry. So those are your three. I'm not sure about UFC 228, UFC 229, or UFC 230. So those are your three upcoming UFC pay-per-view events. If I had to rank the pay-per-views in terms of the one up from 1 to 3 in terms of which ones I'm most excited for, number 1 would be UFC 226. Miocic versus Cormier and Holloway versus Ortega. Number 2 would be Dillashaw versus Garbrandt 2. And number 3 would be Whitaker versus Romero. And then, I forgot to mention, the co-main event for the interim welterweight belt will be between Rafael Dos Anjos and, Colby Covington. So, again, number 1, UFC 226, Miocic versus Cormier, Holloway versus Ortega. Number 2, UFC 227, Dillashaw versus Garbrandt. And number 3, Whitaker versus Romero 2, and Dos Anjos versus Covington. So that's going to do it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, punch that like button like a UFC fighter and punch that subscribe button. Until next time, this is Unger to the Max signing off. Salute, go Cavs, and go Jackets. And go Jags.